change, oh change has come on.
Hello, my NF Geeks colleagues. It's me, Franklin, again. And this video is going to be a response video to Mike's video on change. And I'm basically going to be talking to you today about change from the SJ perspective. Before I get into that, I do just want to take a minute to vent and say that I just do not believe that the universe is being very fair to me today. And the reason I'm saying that is because I am originally from Detroit, Michigan. And I recently moved to Kansas to become the pastor here. And today, it is December 5th. And the temperature in Detroit is 42 degrees. The temperature here is 16. And I just think that the universe is playing some sort of cruel joke at this particular point in time. But change. So we're going to talk about change from the SJ's perspective. And first, I'm going to just basically talk about some general understandings of change through the SJ perspective. Then I'll talk about some personal changes and how I've reacted to those. So first of all, SJs, we have this persona that we don't like change. And the fact of the matter is that if we're honest about it, a lot of human beings don't like certain kinds of changes. But change, it depends on the change. Change is good or bad. The birth of a child, for most people, that's going to be a good change. It's going to change their life forever, but it's going to be a good change. Getting laid off from your job, for most people, that's going to be a bad change. So the assessment that just basically SJs don't like change, I don't think is necessarily a fair assessment. Now, we do have certain issues with change. First of all, when it comes to change for an SJ, we need to understand the reason for the change. We don't like change necessarily just for the sake of change. So if you come to us and say, well, we want to change the way we do this, why? Now, just to change. We may have an issue with that. We need to understand that the change is going to take place because something's going to be better. And that's important. To understand that we don't mind change if the situation after the change is going to be better. It's when it's not better or when it's just the same and we went through this change, that's when you run into an issue with SJs because we can handle the change. If I was an executive at Kodak years ago and you come to me and you say, well, let's switch from film to digital, and I ask you why, and you say, well, I truly do believe that digital is the wave of the future. Okay, let's make that change. Just make sure that it's right. And you would have been right. If you come to me and say, okay, let's change I'm a Ford executive, and you say, let's just change the body style on the Mustang next year. Well, why next year? I don't know, just to do it. No, that isn't going to work for us because we need to understand the reason for the change. Also, whenever possible, and I think this goes across the board, but especially for SJs, prepare us for the change. If a change is going to take place in our lives, we need to understand, okay, that's going to happen. Give us some time to prepare. Now, let's look at, what I want to do is look at the difference between change and NFs and SJs real quickly. Because one thing became apparent to me as I was listening to Mike's video is when he discussed change basically came from the standpoint of personal relationships. And I understand why that is because personal relationships, love, romance, those are things that are extremely important to NFs. Not that they're unimportant to us as SJs, because they are. Trust me, we like romance. We like love. But when he was talking about change, the first thing that came to mind for me was change within a work environment. Why? Because SJs are very duty-oriented. So that was one thing that came to mind. Now, and he talked about flipping. What I see with SJs and change is something that's similar to flipping, but not quite. What I think happens with SJs is an acceptance. So there's this change that takes place in our lives. We may or may not like it. We may or may not have issues with it, but we accept it. We say, okay, basically, to use SJ language, this is the way things are going to be. There's nothing that we can do about it right now, so we just accept it and let's move on. So that's what happens basically with us, even in relationships. Of course, Mike talked about how he dealt with change in relationships in terms of starting and losing relationships. And I don't have as much experience in that simply because I got married at the age of 24. I'm 40 now, and I have had the privilege of being married to the same woman for now going on 16 years. So that has been wonderful. And so I don't have that experience. If I go back to the experience before I was married and girlfriends that I had, I'm going to be honest with you, I was a tad bit arrogant. So what would happen is the relationship would end. My thought process would be, okay, her loss. I was a good man. I know that. Would it be some emotion there? Yeah, there's going to be emotion for the loss. But that would not last very long. And then I would just accept it. Okay, that person is not in my life anymore. Let's move on. And I would move on. Now, when we look at when SJs have the most difficult time dealing with change, it's a few. First is, again, when the change appears to be unnecessary. Second is when you don't prepare us for it. And the third is when it is a change in a tradition that we hold dear. Certain SJs hold their traditions very dear and very close to them. And when those traditions have to be changed, or when they are changed, because again, remember, it has to make sense to us. So especially with our tradition, if you're going to change our tradition, it needs to make sense as to the reason why. And it can't be, well, let's just because we want to do something different now. Oh no, you're messing with my tradition now. You can't just change my tradition because you just say, I want to do something different. We can do something different, but we can do something different and we can still honor the tradition. So that's basically some of the things about SJs and how we deal with change. Let me talk about it a little more from a personal aspect and changes that have taken place in my life. And I'd say the major changes in my life that have taken place in the past few years have been major moves. As I stated earlier, I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, went away for college, spent a little bit of time in the United States Naval Reserves, came back home to Detroit, and my thought was Detroit would be my life. And then I got the call into ministry and decided that I needed to be better trained, and that would entail a move. So my family and I moved from Detroit, Michigan to Ashland, Ohio. So we moved from a city of, at that time, about 800,000 people to a city of about 30,000 people, and on the outskirts of the city was Amish country. Now, to an NF, I think what I'm about to say is going to sound harsh, so allow me to explain it. When that move took place, I am not one who misses entities that aren't in my life anymore. In other words, I have very close friends who still live in Detroit. My family is still in Detroit. And when I get a chance to get back and spend time with them, it is a joy, and I'm excited about it. But I don't spend a lot of time missing them when they're not in my presence. Because what happened, I made the move to Ohio. I began seminary, my focus at that point is on the task at hand. And my task at hand is I'm here, I'm involved in seminary, and my next step is to actually go into full-time ministry, but in order to do that, I have to complete this step of getting through seminary. And so my mind is focused on that task, so I don't have time to miss. Again, do I look forward to time that I get to go back and see them? Do I look forward to time that we get to spend together? Absolutely. But I don't have time to miss them. The next major change in my life took place just a few months ago when I moved from Ohio here to Kansas to become the pastor here at the church. And once again, good friends, good colleagues, a mentor that I have the greatest amount of respect for. But again, not a whole lot of time to miss their presence. Now, I think that part of what happens is we live in the Facebook generation, and you're able to have that contact back and forth. I can't tell you how many times I've had communication either by phone or email with my mentor to ask him questions about being a pastor. My family, I talk to on a weekly basis on the telephone. But my focus once again now is I've moved to Kansas. I'm here to be the pastor at this church. I don't have time to miss people. Because what I'm doing is I've accepted this is where I am, and this is the situation, and this is what I have to do. So again, when I look at change from an SJ perspective, I think most of all it's just acceptance of a situation. Now, that being said, sudden changes are not good, not sudden changes that I'm not allowed to prepare for. Before I became a pastor, I worked in corporate America. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that corporate America makes is that they make changes without explanation, and they make them without preparing. Remember, as an SJ, the change needs to make sense. So rather than just introduce a new policy, whenever possible, it's good to introduce the new policy and explain, okay, this is why we're doing this. And for some reason, people in higher roles, vice presidents and things like that, they think, well, we don't have to do that. And they're absolutely right. They don't have to do that. But it would help if they did. It would, because I think one of the things about SJs, people think, okay, well, they just will accept it the way it is, and they'll go about it. Again, we have that acceptance. So that you're right, we will. But it does still hurt performance and morale, because it hurts morale. So you don't want the sudden change. You want to, whenever possible, explain to me and other SJs why this is going to take place, and give us time to adjust to the change, if possible. Again, I understand that that's not always possible. And the final thing with me, the change that I have found most difficult, and I mentioned this earlier, is change in tradition. I have a tradition of I like to put up Christmas trees at Christmas, and I specifically live Christmas trees. Well, we just moved down here, and we're not going to be able to do that this year. And no Christmas decorations, no Christmas trees, no nothing. And I'm not looking forward to that. I have accepted it. It's been accepted. It's not going to happen. No Christmas tree this year. No Christmas lights. Okay, we'll do it next year. But it's hard for me to accept changes in tradition especially if they're not necessary. So you come to me and you say, well, let's not put up a Christmas tree this year. And my response to you is, well, why don't you want to put up a Christmas tree this year? Because we do it every year. Let's not do it this year. That's not going to work for me, because you haven't given me what I sense to be a valid reason not to do it. Well, you say I want to do something different. Okay, we can do something different, but I also want to keep my tradition. So, because you have to remember, with some SJs, certain personality types within SJ, tradition is very important. especially among ISTJs and ISFJs. So you want to take that in consideration when you're talking about changes. Are you making change to tradition that they hold dear? And if so, is there a good reason for it? Well, that's pretty much all that I have. This is just a brief glimpse into understanding change from the SJ perspective.